In the last video, we discussed the first 3 best building practices when working with immigrants towards thriving. So now we'll focus on the last 2 practices. Number 4 is treat refugees or other immigrants as whole people, not flat caricatures. I recently read a really great book about the refugee experience called The Ungrateful Refugee by Dina Nayeri. She's a refugee herself, and so she weaves her own story together with many other stories of people that she's met throughout the years. And she explores the psychology of displacement, of waiting, of gradual, painful transformation. I'd highly recommend the book. I really like the fact that she resists the urge to play on the pathos of the refugee narrative, because she explains that that narrative is only a small wedge of the whole story, which is selected to conform to what a refugee should be. Instead, Nayeri leverages the entirety of her story and these other people's stories, the quirks, the contradictions, all of it, to powerfully portray refugees as people who are just like anyone else, which is to say they're interesting, they're flawed, they're wise, they're petty, they're talented, they're human. Why do we flatten the narrative of these fully human individuals? Honestly, it's a coping mechanism to deal with horrific circumstances. Refugees themselves do this. They flatten that narrative to just make it one story, their escape story. UNHCR officials, the people who are dealing with refugees and helping them process their cases, they do this as a coping mechanism. And also people that interact with refugees just on a daily basis, not knowing really what else to ask about or what to talk about, they also just zoom in on that one narrative because that's what they know, right? So yes, it is a coping mechanism, but imagine being defined by the worst moment or the worst season of your life, being forced to package that story and tell it again and again and again, having that as the most important part of your identity. Battered wife, addict, adulterer, cancer patient. These things might be a part of your story, but they're not all of your story, right? And you would not want to wear these experiences like a scarlet letter on you forever. And refugees, I would say, should not have to wear the scarlet R, as it were, or immigrants should not have to wear the scarlet I, that's the most important part of their identity. When Nayeri zooms into this really disorienting street level closeness to the refugee experience, it kind of throws us off balance, and it makes us realize that every single refugee is a person who has an escape story. Yes, that's one small slice of their story, which has been flattened, right? But they also have 1,000 other stories, 1,000,000 other stories, the strands of which make up a full-orbed, complicated life, just like our lives. Being a refugee is only a part of their story. Being an immigrant is only a part of immigrants' stories in general. They are primarily an image bearer of God himself. Recently, I've been focusing on trying to remember this fact in all of my interactions with all people, whether it's my refugee friends or my next door neighbor or my doctor or the man who asks me for money at CVS, that they're all created in the image of God and infinitely valuable to him. And beyond that, each one of them has this complex story with subplots and contradictions and tragedies and triumphs, and it's all brought them to this place, right? And they're facing a great battle because that's the human condition. And that pretty much what they desire out of life is to be loved and to belong, and probably that desire has not been fulfilled in their lives in one way or another. This is very intense, right? But this is the reality. C.S. Lewis says, "The load or the weight or the burden of my neighbor's glory should be laid daily on my back, a load so heavy that only humility can carry it." So how can we humbly carry the weight of our neighbor's glory in our daily interactions with friends in refugee situations or with immigrants in general? Nayeri has some advice, and this leads to best building practice number 5, the last one. Let immigrants be the hero in their own stories. Nayeri writes, "In refugee communities, volunteers often ask each other, what can I do to make it easier for them? They offer their homes, they run errands, they set up language tables, soccer games, meals. Again and again, I've met neighbors like these. The question, though, isn't one of generosity, but of shame, dignity, and belonging. permission for the stranger to show his true face. In every small interaction, one ego shines while the other fades. To the native-born who want to open their arms, I would say, let yourself fade away, ever briefly. Don't shine in your good deeds, because people keep their dignity quite near the core of their identity. Show your humblest face at first. I absolutely love that advice. Don't let your ego shine. Show your humblest face at first. We must resist the urge to be the hero of a refugee or an immigrant friend's story. The savior trope, it was tired from the moment it was introduced. It has no place in any friendship. We have one savior, right? Instead, we must allow a refugee friend or an immigrant friend, an asylum seeker friend, to be the hero of their own story while we accept the role of a guide. This concept comes from Donald Miller, who used it in business, but it also applies here. So instead of the hero, try to be the guide in your relationships with immigrants. As a guide, we can advise immigrants along the way. We can offer counsel. We can give encouragement. We can cheer them on. But in the end, the fight and the victories along the way are theirs and theirs alone. If we are true friends to immigrants, we must avoid the spotlight and instead do our best to give them room to shine. After hearing this, getting involved with immigrants may seem very fraught. We may be tempted to say, well, what if I do it wrong? It's best not to get involved. And Nairi actually, she anticipates that we will think this, and she addresses it in her book. She acknowledges plunging a hand into another's remaking is a serious business. But she continues, you might misstep and cause harm. That is better than drawing a thick line around them. In life, people disappoint each other. Messes are made. The only way to avoid pain is to distance yourself and to look down on them from the rescuer's perch. But that denies them what they most urgently need, to be useful, to belong to a place. This, I believe, is the way to help the displaced. It is what we owe each other, to love, to bring outsiders in. And Nairi sums up, what a thing to be loved by a stranger, to have a stranger bother to meddle in your life. Jesus says to the goats in Matthew 25, I was a stranger and you did not welcome me. What a tragically missed opportunity. If we allow fear of the other or fear of awkwardness to keep us in our comfort zones, our God is the one who hides behind things that are scary and unfamiliar, and he's calling to us, come closer, draw near to what you fear and brave the awkwardness of unfamiliarity. I'm on the other side.